Fellowship of the Broken, Making Sense of 12-Step Recovery by Angelo. Chapter 17. Idealism or Realism. I accept that much of what I've shared so far could be seen as idealistic. A grand theory of consciousness and a collection of metaphors are all very interesting, but there is reasonable doubt that any of this can be of any practical use in the real world. Before we go any further, I would like to address this doubt. The answer to the question as to whether spiritual understanding can be of any practical use in our lives is an emphatic yes. Indeed, such apparent idealism can be seen to be very realistic, and the so-called realism of the materialistic paradigm turns out to be idealistic. The word idealism is defined as the unrealistic belief in or pursuit of perfection. In philosophy, idealism is a group of metaphysical philosophies that assert that reality as we perceive it is fundamentally mentally constructed or immaterial. And the etymology of idealism points to a belief that reality is comprised only of ideas. All of this seems to indicate that an understanding of consciousness, as I've described it, is idealistic. The word realism is defined as the acceptance of and response to a situation as it is. Philosophical realism is the belief that reality exists independently of observers. In the arts, realism is the attempt to represent subject matter truthfully and without artificiality or implausible elements. And the etymology of realism simply denotes real as opposed to unreal. Based on these meanings, it would seem that the explanation of consciousness that I have outlined is unrealistic. The challenge here is to accept that words are clumsy when it comes to describing consciousness. Words arise out of consciousness after the brain has processed it. Consciousness precedes all words, and hence language reaches an obvious limit. Words cannot describe that which gives rise to words. The question as to the idealism or realism of consciousness, awareness, knowingness, mind, spirit, or being hinges on our understanding of what is real and what is unreal. Here we find paradox cropping up again, because it can be said that the world is both real and unreal. The ego mind perceives the world through its conditioning and limited senses, and in this respect the experience of the world is real. However, the same mind dreams an unreal world during REM sleep. Hence we cannot be certain that the waking state experience of the world is real in an absolute sense. When perceived from the wisdom of universal mind, the world can be said to be unreal, because it's all an everlasting vibration of itself. Nothing is static or permanent other than source consciousness. The only reliable reality, therefore, is consciousness. The entire universe is in perpetual motion, and consequently it can be said with accuracy that no thing ever exists, because there is no moment in time when anything can exist categorically. So the world is real from the viewpoint of ego mind, but unreal from the position of universal mind. And the human mind is a limited version of the universal mind, and is in a constant state of movement. The human mind does not exist absolutely, but is instead simply a transient individual manifestation of universal mind. The human mind is unreal, and only universal mind itself is real. The world may appear real to the human mind, but the true nature of the world must be unreal. An unreal mind cannot perceive reality. We think we know what is real, but in truth we do not. The world is real only from the relative point of view of the personal mind. This can be very difficult to accept, because we are naturally convinced that the world does exist. Logic tells us that the world cannot exist only in our minds, because the world continues to exist when our minds are not present. If I'm looking at a bird perched on a rock, then the rock exists in my experience and also, presumably, in the experience of the bird. If I then turn my attention elsewhere, then the rock still exists and is still experienced by the bird. This seems so obvious that it's generally beyond question. However, the world exists only in the mind of consciousness and is perceived through many billions of points of awareness. The fact that one point of awareness moves its attention elsewhere does not cause the rock to disappear. There are numerous other points of awareness, including the bird. The rock will always exist in the mind of consciousness as long as there is awareness of it. Consciousness is everywhere and is everything, so it will always have awareness. Hence the rock will always seem to exist. This simple example helps to reconcile the apparent conflict between this understanding of consciousness and our undeniable personal experience. Ultimately, it is consciousness that is real, and our personal experience that is unreal. The belief that the world is real is admittedly a deeply ingrained belief, but a belief nonetheless. Beliefs are just thoughts of the personal ego mind that are given credence because they seem to be unquestionably true. Once we see that our perceived version of reality is in fact unreal, then the entire basis of realism falls apart. Realism is based on the assumption that the material world has an independent existence, but in fact it is a product of consciousness perceived through a multitude of individual minds. Realism depends upon an idea that turns out to be fundamentally flawed. Realism is based upon an unrealistic belief, and hence can be seen as idealistic. Idealism, on the other hand, is not founded on mind-based assumptions. As noted above, idealism asserts that reality as we perceive it is fundamentally mental and immaterial. This is entirely consistent with the understanding that consciousness is the underlying reality of existence. There is no reality other than that which the individual and collective mind perceives, and such perception is a function of consciousness. Idealism is based on the only true reality that is, and therefore is the ultimate realism. Idealism is perfectly realistic. Well, having concluded that idealism is realistic, we can now turn our attention to how this understanding of consciousness can be put to practical use in our mind-based experience of life. The human mind suffers the absence of happiness, peace, love, and unity. We spend our lives trying to satisfy these desires. We may achieve periodic, momentary relief, but the default status is always discontent. However much temporary soothing we may experience through material success, personal pleasure, or relationships, there's never enough to satisfy the unspoken void. The harder we try to gratify our self-centered desires, the more elusive the solution seems to be. The idea of allowing life to take care of life seems counter to everything that we've been previously taught. In order to solve this conundrum, we need to again return to the understanding that our entire lives take place in the mind, in the form of thoughts, images, emotions, sensations, and sensory perceptions. All of this experience is a complex, interrelated collection of vibrations of consciousness processed in the brain. Our own individual vibration, together with the vibration of our environment and culture, heavily influence how this consciousness is processed into experience. This can best be explained by reference to the concept of resonance in physics. Resonance is a phenomenon whereby a vibrating system or external force drives another system to oscillate with greater amplitude at specific frequencies. Resonance occurs with all types of vibrations or waves and includes mechanical, acoustic, electromagnetic, nuclear magnetic, electron spin and quantum wave functions. Basically, the concept is that vibrations from one origin can impact vibrations in seemingly unrelated objects, energies, or systems. A well-known example is the ability of a human voice to shatter a wine glass, but there are countless others. Once we understand that the whole of creation is a perpetual vibration of consciousness, then the concept of resonance across different aspects of manifestation makes perfect sense. This includes the vibrations of our own minds. The vibrations of an individual human being, therefore, have a tangible impact on its own experience and also on the energies and systems in its environment. Thought really does have the ability to change apparent reality. This notion of resonance appears in New Thought philosophy as the law of attraction. The understanding is summarized as that which is like unto itself is drawn, or, more simply, like attracts like. Numerous authors have written on this subject, but my favourite quote is from Charles Haanel in The Master Key System from 1912, where he says, quote, "The law of attraction will certainly and unerringly bring to you the conditions, environment and experiences in life corresponding with your habitual, characteristic, predominant mental attitude." Close quote. The simple application of this idea is in the realm of positive thinking, but I would also suggest that the subconscious level of mind also plays a key part, whether it's from our psychic blueprint or our childhood conditioning, or a mixture of both. Basically, we may try to think positive thoughts, but somehow these can be outweighed by a deeper negative personal mindset. This leaves us trapped in a negative experience of life, however hard we try to think ourselves out of it. Even with positive thinking and determination, we will still be prone to the vibrational influences of the subconscious mind. Any practical solution to suffering, therefore, needs to address what Haanel calls our habitual, characteristic, predominant mental attitude. This implies going beyond conscious ego mind and moving identification increasingly towards universal mind. It really is that simple. The movement of identification from ego mind to universal mind, or from human to being, is a gradual process of transformation or metamorphosis. It starts by firstly allowing the process to begin. This allowing is essential because transformation cannot happen without our cooperation. The resulting change is not an event, but is instead a natural process that unfolds over time. Such change takes place through the increasing absence of personal self-centeredness, and hence is not an achievement of the ego mind. Transformation is not something to be proud of, but it does require a certain amount of dedicated effort by the personal self until such time as ego mind is purified and eventually replaced by universal mind. This personal effort is necessary in order to overcome the habitual, characteristic, predominant mental attitude. Given the entrenched nature of the personal ego mind, the required action needs to be consistent and persistent, otherwise we simply go back to our old ways. Once the individual becomes more established in universal mind, the work gradually becomes effortless. The tools needed for the required action are consistent across all spiritual traditions. They can be summarized as self-awareness, self-contemplation, and self-forgetting, as well as other complementary activities intended to raise the vibration of ego mind towards universal mind. This all makes complete sense when seen in the light of the overall objective, which is to satisfy our core desire for happiness, peace, love and unity. This desire is intrinsically part of the human manifestation, and hence is common to all of us. The desire is satisfied not by external gratification, but by abiding in consciousness, the nature of which is exactly what we are longing for. I will cover each of the tools in later chapters, but for now the key understanding is that there are practical, reliable ways to change our individual vibration and hence, in turn, transform our conditions, environment and experiences of life. The suggested actions are not idealistic, but on the contrary, are pragmatic and realistic. The realistic solution to personal suffering is transformation through spiritual practice. Other solutions are idealistic because they fail to address the fundamental nature of consciousness.